Dallas, Texas, August 10, 2014. The serene tranquility of an exclusive neighborhood is interrupted when the police cordon off a house on Maple Drive. Inside, they discover a scene that defies the calm of the surroundings. What began as a seemingly ordinary matter has turned into a tangled web of deception, betrayal, and ultimately murder. The story that unfolds will leave you questioning how well you know the people closest to you. Dallas, the year 2000. Maria and David Thompson were the kind of couple people admired. Their lives seemed perfect from the outside. Maria, 26, worked as a successful real estate agent. She had a natural charm and knew how to close deals, which made her one of the top agents in Dallas. David, 28, was an investment banker. His job was demanding, but he thrived under pressure, always seeking more success. Together, they lived in a large house in an upscale neighborhood, with all the luxuries that came with their successful careers. They had nice cars, hosted elegant dinners, and were often seen as the ideal couple in their social circle. David's younger brother Andrew was a frequent visitor in their home. Andrew, 24, was an aspiring musician with a carefree spirit that contrasted sharply with David's serious and responsible nature. Andrew was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking in. He wasn't tied to the same responsibilities as David. Instead, Andrew lived a life of spontaneity, pursuing his musical career with passion, but without much success. Despite this, he remained optimistic and continued to chase his dream. Andrew often stayed at David and Maria's house for weeks, especially when he was between gigs or needed a place to stay. Over time, his presence became a constant in their lives. At first, the relationship between Maria and Andrew was just friendly. They talked about music, life, and the future. But as time passed, their conversations became more personal, more intimate. The two found themselves sharing secrets and spending more time together when David was at work. By 2005, the bond between Maria and Andrew had grown beyond friendship. It was a secret, passionate connection that neither had anticipated. They knew what they were doing was wrong, but the thrill and risk of hiding made it impossible to stop. They began meeting in secret, choosing places where they wouldn't be recognized. Sometimes it was at a hotel across town. Other times it was in the back seat of Andrew's car, parked in a secluded area. They exchanged coded messages, hiding their affair from everyone, especially David. As the years passed, their affair grew more intense. Maria and Andrew couldn't get enough of each other. Every moment they spent apart was like torture. The risk of being discovered only added more intensity to their relationship. They knew they were walking a dangerous line, but the idea of ending the affair was too painful to consider. In 2007, Andrew began pressuring Maria to leave David. He was tired of living in the shadows, of hiding like a criminal. He wanted to be with Maria openly, to start a new life together. But Maria was torn. She loved Andrew deeply, but she was also used to the life she had with David, the stability, the luxury, the respect she received from others. All of that was hard to leave behind. Maria felt trapped between two lives, unable to fully commit to either. By 2012, the cracks in their secret began to show. The thrill of the affair was starting to fade as the reality of their situation became apparent. Both knew it couldn't go on forever. Maria became more distant, worried that someone might find out. Andrew, on the other hand, was frustrated. He didn't understand why Maria wouldn't just leave David. The tension between them grew, leading to frequent arguments. The relationship, once full of passion, was now clouded by doubt and frustration. In May 2014, David, who had always been suspicious of Andrew's frequent visits, decided to take action. David had noticed subtle changes in Maria's behavior. The way she smiled at her phone, the sudden work meetings that kept her out late, and the whispered phone calls she thought he didn't hear. David hired a private investigator to find out what was really going on. For weeks, the investigator followed Maria, documenting her every move. On June 10, 2014, the investigator handed David a folder full of photographs and text messages that confirmed his worst fears. The evidence was undeniable. Maria was having an affair with Andrew. The betrayal hurt him deeply. David felt a rage he had never experienced before, but he didn't show it. Instead, he calmly thanked the investigator and began planning his next move. On June 15, 2014, David confronted Maria. It was a warm evening, and Maria had just returned from one of her supposed meetings. She was surprised to find David waiting for her in the living room, with the folder of evidence on the coffee table. David's face was calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes that Maria had never seen before. Without raising his voice, David asked her to sit down. He then began showing her the photographs, one by one. Maria's face paled as she realized she had been caught. At first, she tried to deny it, claiming the photos were fake, but the evidence was too overwhelming. David then pulled out the printouts of the text messages, each more incriminating than the last. Maria broke down in tears, begging for forgiveness, insisting that the affair meant nothing and that she still loved David. But David wasn't interested in her apologies. His trust in her had been destroyed, and there was no way to repair the damage that had been done. After hours of tense conversation, David stood up, looked at Maria one last time, and walked out of the room. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't cry, but Maria could tell by the expression in his eyes that something in him had changed. In the days that followed, David's mind filled with thoughts of revenge. He was consumed by anger and betrayal, but he didn't want to act impulsively. David knew that if he was going to do something, he had to be careful, meticulous even. He began researching ways to commit the perfect crime, spending hours on the internet, reading about murder cases and deception. He watched videos, read articles, and even downloaded books on criminal psychology. By June 20th, 2014, David had devised a plan. It wasn't enough for him to simply kill Maria. He wanted Andrew to suffer too. David decided he would kill Maria and frame Andrew for the crime. He believed that if he planned everything down to the smallest detail, he could pull it off without getting caught. David's meticulous nature meant that every aspect of the plan was carefully considered. David began by collecting evidence that would incriminate Andrew. He placed some of Andrew's belongings in the house, items that would place him at the crime scene. He also began manipulating the digital correspondence between Maria and Andrew, leaving a trail that suggested a heated argument between them. He knew the police would find it, and it would help solidify Andrew's motive. By July 1st, 2014, David had everything he needed. All that remained was waiting for the perfect moment to act. David maintained a calm appearance, going about his daily routine as if nothing was wrong. But inside he was seething with rage, counting down the days until he could execute his plan. August 1st, 2014. David's mind had been racing for days. The anger and betrayal he felt had turned into a chilling resolve. He decided that Maria's life had to end and that Andrew had to bear the blame. This wasn't a decision made in a moment of fury, but rather a cold, calculated plan he had been forming since he discovered the affair. David knew he had to be meticulous. Every detail had to be perfect. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes that would link him to the murder. His first step was manipulating the evidence to make it look like Andrew had committed the crime. David began by collecting items that would later place Andrew at the scene, including traces of Andrew's DNA, which David carefully placed on various objects around the house. Over the following days, he worked on erasing any evidence that might connect him to what was about to happen. He wiped down surfaces he knew he would touch, and made sure any object that could be used in the crime was clean to remove his fingerprints. David also started planting evidence in places where the police would easily find it. He had managed to collect some of Andrew's blood, which he kept in a small vial at the back of the fridge. That blood would play a crucial role in framing Andrew. David knew that once the police saw it, they would immediately believe Andrew was the killer. August 9th, 2014. This was the day David had marked on his calendar. He had gone over the plan in his mind over and over again, making sure nothing was left to chance. By the time the day arrived, David was calm. His emotions were buried deep beneath the surface. He spent the day as usual, going to work and interacting with his colleagues as if it were any other day. But inside, he knew that by the time the sun rose the next morning, his life would have changed forever. That night, David prepared everything. He chose the kitchen as the place where he would confront Maria. It was a room that could be easily cleaned, and it had the added benefit of being where Maria felt most comfortable. David prepared 2 glasses of wine, one for him and one for Maria. The wine he had set aside for Maria was mixed with a potent sedative, something he had obtained weeks earlier under the pretense of needing help sleeping. David waited in the living room pretending to watch TV until he heard the familiar sound of Maria's car pulling into the driveway. It was 10 o'clock when Maria walked through the door. She looked tired, but there was a slight smile on her face, a smile that disappeared the moment she saw David. She knew something was wrong, but David quickly reassured her, telling her he wanted to talk things over and forgive her for what she had done. Relieved, Maria accepted the glass of wine he offered her. As Maria sipped the wine, they talked. David acted as though he wanted to fix their relationship, and Maria, believing his lies, began to relax. But as the minutes passed, she started to feel drowsy, her head growing heavy. David watched her closely, noticing the moment her eyelids began to droop. Within minutes, Maria was unconscious, slumped over in her chair. David wasted no time. He dragged Maria's limp body to the garage where he had already set the stage. David placed one of Andrew's guitar picks on the floor near Maria's body, making it seem as though he had dropped it during a struggle. He then took the vial of Andrew's blood and carefully smeared it on Maria's clothes, making sure to place it in spots where the police would easily find it. David knew that blood evidence would be crucial in convincing the police that Andrew was the killer. David then grabbed a kitchen knife, one of Andrew's favorites, which he often used for his artistic projects. It was a unique knife, easily identifiable, and David knew the police would quickly connect it to Andrew. With the knife in hand, David stabbed Maria in the chest, making sure to inflict a wound that matched the size and shape of the blade. He had studied crime scenes enough to know how to make it look like there had been a struggle. After stabbing Maria, David arranged her body to make it seem as though she had tried to defend herself from her attacker. He knocked over some objects in the garage, tipped over a chair, and placed some of Andrew's personal belongings near the body. Everything was set to create a narrative. Andrew had attacked Maria in a fit of rage, killing her in a violent struggle. Once he was satisfied with the scene, David set about cleaning up. He removed any trace of his presence, wiping down surfaces and making sure nothing was left that could link him to the crime. He was methodical, taking his time to ensure that the only evidence left behind pointed directly to Andrew. August 10th, 2014, 8 a.m. David made the call to the police. His voice trembled, full of feigned surprise and horror, as he told the operator that he had found his wife dead in the garage. The police arrived within minutes, quickly turning the scene into a flurry of activity as officers cordoned off the area and began their investigation. David played the role of the grieving husband to perfection. He answered the detectives' questions, sticking to his story that Andrew must have killed Maria. The evidence the police found seemed to back up his claims. The knife, the guitar pick, the bloodstains, everything pointed to Andrew. The detectives quickly issued a warrant for Andrew's arrest, believing they had found the killer. By August 11th, 2014, Andrew was in custody, shocked and confused as the police told him he was being charged with the murder of Maria Thompson. Andrew protested his innocence, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. David watched from a distance, his expression blank as his plan unfolded just as he had imagined. The morning was tense as police officers arrived at Andrew's apartment. He had just woken up when they knocked on his door, the sound echoing ominously in the quiet hallway. Andrew opened the door, still groggy, only to be met by the serious faces of the detectives. They informed him that he was under arrest for the murder of Maria Thompson. Andrew was stunned. He had no idea what was going on. The officers cuffed him and led him to the patrol car as his mind raced, trying to comprehend the situation. At the station, Andrew was taken to an interrogation room, a cold, sterile space designed to make even the innocent feel guilty. The detectives sat across from him, their expressions unreadable. They began questioning him about his relationship with Maria, asking pointed questions about the affair and what had happened the night of August 9th. Andrew answered truthfully, admitting to the affair but adamantly denying any involvement in Maria's murder. He insisted that he loved Maria and would never hurt her. However, the detectives were unconvinced. The evidence against him was too strong to ignore. They presented the incriminating details. The knife, the guitar pick, the blood, all of it pointed to him. The detectives also showed him the text messages between him and Maria, messages that revealed their secret encounters and their plans to be together. These messages, in the eyes of the law, provided a motive for murder. Andrew was devastated. He could see how everything fit together, but he knew he was innocent. The reality of the situation hit him hard. He was being framed, but he had no idea how or why. August 15th, 2014. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to notice inconsistencies in David's story. He had been too calm, they thought, for a man who had just lost his wife in such a brutal manner. His composure, which at first seemed like strength, now seemed suspicious. The detectives decided to dig deeper into David's alibi. They reviewed the security footage from the cameras around the neighborhood, hoping to verify his movements on the night of the murder. What they found surprised them. The footage showed David's car leaving the house multiple times during the night. This was a significant discovery because David had claimed he had been home all night. The detectives knew they had to follow this lead. Why had David left the house? Where had he gone? These were questions that needed answers. The detectives also noticed that David had been unusually cooperative throughout the investigation. It was as if he wanted to help, which in their experience wasn't typical of someone who had just experienced such a traumatic event. This behavior added to their growing suspicion that David might be hiding something. August 18, 2014. Armed with the new information from the security footage, the detectives obtained a warrant to search David's office and home. They believed David might have been involved in the crime in some way, and they were determined to find out how. The search of David's office was thorough. The detectives went through his computer files and personal belongings, looking for anything that might link him to the murder. It didn't take long for them to find what they were looking for. On David's computer, they discovered a series of internet searches that painted a chilling picture. He had searched for terms like how to frame someone for murder and the perfect crime. These searches had been made in the weeks leading up to Maria's death. This was a turning point in the investigation. The evidence suggested that David had planned Maria's murder and had carefully orchestrated the scene to frame Andrew. The search of David's home uncovered even more damning evidence. Hidden in his garage was a box containing items that directly connected him to the crime: gloves, cleaning supplies, and a vial containing Andrew's blood. This was enough to confirm the detectives' suspicions. David's carefully crafted plan was beginning to unravel, and the detectives were starting to see the full picture. August 20th, 2014. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives moved quickly. David was arrested at his office, where he had been working as if nothing had happened. He was taken into custody and charged with the murder of Maria Thompson and the attempted framing of his brother Andrew. The arrest shocked everyone who knew David. He had always been seen as the successful, stable older brother, the one who had everything under control. But now that image was shattered. David was placed in a cell where he awaited trial. Meanwhile, Andrew was released from custody, his name cleared, but his life forever changed. The ordeal had taken a devastating toll on him. He couldn't believe that his own brother had tried to frame him for murder. The betrayal cut deep and the loss of Maria weighed heavily on his heart. October 2014. David Thompson's trial was a spectacle. The media followed every development, with reporters camping outside the courthouse eager for any new detail. The prosecution presented a compelling case against David, laying out the evidence in painstaking detail. They showed the jury the security footage, the planted evidence, and the internet searches that revealed David's sinister plan. Andrew took the stand to testify about his relationship with Maria and how David had manipulated him. He spoke about the guilt he felt over the affair, but also about the shock and disbelief that his own brother had betrayed him in such a cruel way. The courtroom was silent as Andrew described the events leading up to Maria's death, his voice heavy with emotion. David's defense team tried to argue that he had been driven to madness by the affair, that his actions were the result of a temporary lapse in sanity. But the jury was not swayed. The evidence was overwhelming, and the cold, calculated nature of the crime was impossible to ignore. November 2nd, 2014. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was a fitting end to a case that had shocked the community and left a family in ruins. Andrew was left to rebuild his life. Though he had been exonerated of any wrongdoing, the affair had cost him everything: his lover, his brother, and his peace of mind. The story of the Thompson family became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control and how the darkest secrets can tear even the closest families apart. The question that remains is, what drives a man to such extremes? Was it the betrayal of a wife he once loved, or the twisted logic of a mind obsessed with control? Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that delve into the darkest corners of human nature. On October 15, 2021, the police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher lying in a pool of his own blood. The main suspect, his girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and increasing control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout the apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noticed Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "At first I thought it was just shyness, but as she grew older I noticed how possessive she could be with the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other kids, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text me nonstop when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she would show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I just thought it was because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was there that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, recalled Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," said Sarah, "but sometimes it seemed like she used her skills to control everyone around her. She would casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't have known without some kind of digital spying." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her coworkers described her as meticulous and dedicated, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she would get upset or become manipulative. It was exhausting." When Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020 to accept a remote position with her company, she had already left a trail of broken relationships in her wake. However, those who knew her could not have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan's life contrasted sharply with Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 siblings in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh." From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had a contagious enthusiasm for literature. "I always thought he would make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from college with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by stable, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always very balanced," she said. "He valued his independence but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We ended things because our careers were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May of 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to her new life, had gone out to explore her surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met in front of a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever friendly, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his affable nature and warm smile, lingered at the stand longer than she had planned. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love for classic literature and hiking. Impressed by Olivia's sharp mind and intelligence, Ethan suggested they go on a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up Grizzly Peak, offering stunning views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, "Ethan came back from that hike on cloud nine. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they talked for hours without the conversation slowing down." In the weeks that followed, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed quickly. They spent long nights discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of Southern Oregon. To those around them, they seemed like the perfect couple. However, even in those early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She would call or text constantly when they weren't together, and there always seemed to be a reason why Ethan couldn't attend family gatherings without her. Blinded by the excitement of new love, Ethan dismissed these early warning signs. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "She'll settle down once we're more established." Little did Ethan know that this was only the beginning of a pattern that would slowly tighten around him, cutting him off bit by bit from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had practically moved into Ethan's apartment, despite the fact that he had never officially asked her to live with him. She began exerting influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Jessica Lawson, a colleague and friend of Ethan's who also taught English, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to happy hour after school, something he had always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said that Olivia wasn't comfortable with him staying out late. It seemed odd to me, given that she knew most of us and had even come out with us a couple of times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his Facebook and Instagram accounts, which had once been active, became sparse, with infrequent and impersonal posts. When they asked him about it, Ethan simply said he was trying to be more private online, but it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most serious red flags. Amanda Reed recalled a particularly troubling incident during the holiday season of 2020. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. "But that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say that he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said that Olivia wasn't feeling well and that he needed to stay with her, but I could hear her in the background sounding perfectly fine." Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her hold on Ethan. She would oscillate between showering him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't meet her demands. Ethan's friend Mark recalled a camping trip they had planned for months. The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset that he was going without her, even though she had been invited and had declined. As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch, but his colleagues noticed that she seemed to be scanning the classroom as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. One of Ethan's students, Emma Chen, later testified about a disturbing encounter. "Ms. Rogan came to our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive." Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noticed his increasing stress and anxiety, but he deflected their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. "But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she had been hurt in the past and needed more reassurance. He really believed he could help her work through her insecurities." As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also installed sophisticated software that would allow her to access the video feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On Friday afternoon, as Ethan left for his conference, Olivia set her plan into motion. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, giving her full access. Over the next few hours, she carefully placed the cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring that every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment with her heart racing, a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would ease her fears and allow her to fully trust Ethan. The first few days of surveillance proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than calming her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began obsessing over minor details. Why was Ethan smiling as he read that text message? Who was he waiting for by the window? Ethan's colleague David Cho later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, always checking her phone. Once I caught a glimpse of her screen. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep was affected, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One night, while reaching for a book on his bookshelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He clearly remembered organizing them just a few days earlier. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed to have been moved, though he couldn't quite pinpoint how. More unsettling were the times when he felt like he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a chill on the back of his neck, as if someone were staring at him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Jessica Lawson recalled a conversation she had with him during this period. He mentioned feeling uneasy in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying it was probably work stress, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior only heightened Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making offhand comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known. On one occasion, she casually mentioned liking the new brand of coffee he had bought, despite not having been in his apartment for days. On another occasion, she asked about a phone call he had with his mother, though he was sure he hadn't mentioned it. When Ethan expressed confusion over these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or offer vague explanations. You must have mentioned it in conversation, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan began to question his own memories and perceptions. Am I being paranoid? He wondered. Is work stress getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began paying more attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but he hesitated, afraid that his suspicions would sound absurd or that he was overreacting. The moment of revelation came one night in October 2021. Ethan had been up late grading papers, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to head to bed, his elbow knocked over a small potted plant sitting on the end table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, scattering dirt and shards of ceramic across the room. As Ethan knelt down to clean up the mess, something caught his eye among the debris. A small lens no bigger than a pencil eraser glinting faintly under the light. Heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the dirt. It was a miniature camera, cleverly hidden in the base of the plant. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he found 5 more hidden cameras, in the smoke detector, in a picture frame, even in the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind raced as he began to piece together the clues. Olivia's strange comments, her unusually detailed knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched. Everything suddenly made terrifying sense. The woman he had trusted and loved had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. Stunned, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, her concern evident in her tone. With his voice choked with emotion, Ethan told her about his discovery. Amanda listened in silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb from the betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross violation of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's firm voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras, save any recordings you find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn filtered into Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the disassembled remnants of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Good morning, love. Did you sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep exhale, he typed out a message that would set the final tragic act of their relationship into motion. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable when Olivia arrived later that morning. She walked in with her usual smile, leaning in to kiss him, but froze when she saw the serious expression on Ethan's face and the pile of disassembled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavily in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice trembling. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, interrupted her. He spoke of broken trust, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep insecurities, her fear of losing him, her belief that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax in their relationship. Her words tumbled out, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "It's over, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood his ground, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she had captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening to harm herself if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute, though his heart ached to see Olivia's desperation. He knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no going back after this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words had no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan collapsed onto the couch, emotionally drained. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a much more dangerous turn. The events of October 15, 2021, would forever be etched in the memory of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no hint of the tragedy to come. Ethan, emotionally exhausted from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to go for a walk to clear his mind, leaving his phone behind to avoid Olivia's desperate messages. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final, fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face masked by determination. She used her key to enter, her mind swirling with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of entitlement. When Ethan returned home around 7 o'clock that evening, he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a chill of fear down his spine. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we're meant to be together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia oscillated between pleading for a second chance and hurling bitter accusations. Ethan, exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. That was when Olivia's fragile control snapped, in a move that would shock even those who knew her obsessive tendencies. She pulled a kitchen knife from Ethan's own drawer. The next moments were a whirlwind of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia even as he backed away from the knife's edge. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that followed, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler served him well. He managed to wrestle with Olivia, trying to disarm her without hurting her. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing screams and the sound of glass breaking. One of them, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time the police broke down Ethan's apartment door, the tragic scene had already run its fatal course. They found Ethan on the floor, multiple stab wounds in his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics worked in vain to save Ethan's life, Olivia did not resist when the police arrested her. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with the physical evidence from the crime scene and witness testimonies, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda in particular struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in an emotional interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former co-workers and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The prosecution presented a methodical case, guiding the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The hidden surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense did not dispute the basic facts of the case, but focused instead on Olivia's mental state, presenting expert witnesses who testified about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand. Her testimony was a disturbing mix of remorse and justification. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never intended to harm him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom unsettled. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge harshly condemned Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left reflecting on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not only for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a grim reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic dynamics in relationships before they escalate into tragedy. In this story, we discover a betrayal so twisted and vile that it tears apart the very fabric of trust and love in one of the most picturesque neighborhoods of San Francisco. What began as an apparently perfect marriage is about to be shattered by a dark and forbidden secret, a secret that not only involves a husband's infidelity, but the ultimate act of betrayal by a mother who seduced her daughter's husband and destroyed the family she had once raised. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The iconic San Francisco fog rolled over the hills, enveloping the city in a shroud of mystery, as it did every night. From her townhouse in Pacific Heights, Emily could vaguely see the Golden Gate Bridge illuminated in the distance, its grandeur lost to her as she stared out the window. The house was silent, too silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. That silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive, a constant reminder that something was deeply wrong. Emily had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to pick up on the small details others might overlook. It was one of the reasons she had been so successful in her work as a therapist. But lately, her skills had failed her. Or perhaps she had chosen to ignore the signs that were now painfully obvious. David, her husband of 10 years, had become a stranger right before her eyes. She remembered the first time she felt it, that unsettling feeling deep in her gut. It was a few weeks ago, during one of their weekly dinners with her mother, Eleanor. The three of them sat around the table, the smell of roast chicken filling the air as they made light conversation. But there was something different about the way David looked at Eleanor that night, a fleeting glance that was almost intimate. Emily had brushed it off at the time, attributing it to her own hyperactive imagination. After all, why would she suspect her own mother? But the unease lingered, growing with each passing day. David had started coming home later and later, offering flimsy excuses that didn't make much sense. His kisses, once full of passion, had become shallow, and their conversations felt forced, like a feigned effort. Emily tried to ignore it, convincing herself that all couples go through rough patches, that the spark would return with time. It was during one of those late nights when David was still at work, another urgent meeting, according to him, that Emily found herself spiraling into a pit of thoughts. She poured herself a glass of wine, then another, but the alcohol did little to numb the pain in her chest. Her mind raced as she paced the living room, the shadows on the walls seeming to mock her. What if he was cheating? It was absurd, wasn't it? They had built a life together, a life full of love, trust, and memories. But the doubts gnawed at her, relentless, refusing to be silenced. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the darkness of the room pressing down like a heavy blanket. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next day, Emily couldn't shake the growing suspicion that had taken root in her mind. She tried to push it aside, focusing on her patients, but the thoughts kept creeping in. She wondered if she was going crazy, if she was letting paranoia get the best of her, but the feeling was too strong to ignore, too insistent to dismiss. That night, while she sat alone in the living room waiting for David to come home, she made a decision. She would look at his phone. She had never done it before, never felt the need to. They had always trusted each other. But tonight, the doubt was too overwhelming. She needed answers. Her hands trembled as she picked up David's phone from the coffee table, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, telling herself she was being ridiculous, that she wouldn't find anything. But when she unlocked the phone and opened the messages, her worst fears were confirmed. There were messages from her mother. At first they were innocent, but the more she read, the more her stomach churned. The messages became flirtatious, then suggestive until there was no doubt about their nature. Emily's eyes scanned the screen, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." Acid rose in her throat as she read the next message. "You make me feel alive in a way I never thought possible." The sender, Eleanor. The world around her seemed to collapse in that moment. The room spun and Emily dropped the phone, her legs giving way as she sank to the floor. She gasped for air, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound she could have imagined. Her own mother, her husband, the two people she loved most in the world, had conspired against her in the most repulsive way. Images flooded her mind. David and Eleanor together, their bodies entwined. She saw it so clearly. The way his hands would touch her mother the same way they had touched her. The way he would look at her with desire, with lust. The thought made her physically ill, and she barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting into the sink. Emily looked at her reflection in the mirror, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her, a woman broken by the betrayal of those she trusted most. How could this have happened? How could she have been so blind? The questions swirled in her mind, each more torturous than the last. The betrayal was so filthy, so unimaginable, that she couldn't comprehend it. The man she shared her bed with, the woman who had raised her, had been having an affair right under her nose. The thought of their hands on each other, their lips meeting in secret, filled Emily with a rage she had never known before. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat in the living room, the phone still lying where she had dropped it, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge, of how she would confront them, of how she would make them pay for what they had done to her. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it all, a cold and calculating anger began to take root. She wasn't going to let them get away with this, not after what they had done. The sun rose over San Francisco, casting its golden light over a city that would never look the same to Emily. As she heard the sound of David's key in the lock, she steeled herself, knowing that the confrontation that was about to unfold would change their lives forever. The days that followed Emily's discovery were a whirlwind of anguish, heartache, and fury. Her once orderly life plunged into chaos. The knowledge of her husband's betrayal with her mother festered inside her like a wound that refused to heal. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them together. David's hands on Eleanor, her mother's lips on his. The images were inescapable, haunting her day and night. The pain was unbearable, a constant knot in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Emily avoided both David and Eleanor in the days that followed. She couldn't bear to see them, to hear their voices, to be reminded of what they had done. But the confrontation was inevitable. She could feel it building inside her like a storm gathering strength, ready to unleash its fury. She was no longer the woman who had sat waiting for things to get better. The betrayal had changed her, hardened her heart and sharpened her resolve. She needed answers, and she needed to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on her. David seemed to sense that something was wrong, but he was too much of a coward to confront it head-on. Instead, he avoided the topic, tiptoeing around their interactions, offering weak smiles and strained conversations. He tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if the secret he was hiding wasn't tearing their marriage apart. But Emily could see the guilt in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly when he touched her, as if he feared she might recoil. Eleanor, on the other hand, was completely oblivious. She continued to call Emily, leaving cheerful voicemails about lunch plans and shopping trips, utterly ignorant of the storm brewing in her daughter's mind. Emily's anger toward her mother was a slow burn, a simmering rage that threatened to consume her. How could her own mother do this to her? How could she betray the bond they shared, the trust that had been the foundation of their relationship? Emily knew she couldn't avoid them forever. The confrontation was inevitable, but she wanted to be in control of it. She wanted to choose the time and place to face them both when they least expected it, to catch them off guard just as they had done to her. She spent hours planning, rehearsing the words she would say, imagining the expressions on their faces when they realized she knew everything. Finally, the day came when she could no longer contain herself. She had invited Eleanor to lunch, pretending normalcy with a voice that felt foreign to her. Eleanor accepted without hesitation, and now Emily sat in the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared for what was to come. She set the table with the finest china, poured wine into crystal glasses, and arranged the food with trembling hands. When the doorbell rang, Emily's heart skipped a beat. She forced herself to take a deep breath, calming the storm raging inside her. She opened the door to find her mother, who greeted her with a wide smile and a bouquet of flowers in her hands. "Emily, darling, you look beautiful," Eleanor said, stepping inside and kissing her daughter on the cheek. The scent of her mother's perfume, once comforting, now made Emily's stomach churn. "Thank you, Mom," Emily replied, her voice tight. "Come in. I've made lunch." They sat at the table, the tension in the room so thick it could be cut with a knife. Emily watched her mother closely, searching for any sign of guilt, any flicker of recognition that she knew what had happened. But Eleanor was as serene as ever, chatting about trivial matters, completely unaware of the fury simmering inside her daughter. As they ate, Emily's anger grew, fueled by her mother's indifference. She couldn't understand how Eleanor could sit there, laughing and smiling, as if she hadn't destroyed her daughter's life. The betrayal cut deeper with every word that came from her mother's mouth, each mention of David's name said with that familiar tenderness. Finally, Emily couldn't take it anymore. She set her fork down on the table with a clatter, the sound of the silverware against the porcelain echoing in the silence that followed. Her hands shook as she reached into her pocket and pulled out David's phone, tossing it onto the table in front of Eleanor. "What is this, Mom?" Emily's voice was low, cold, but there was a tremor of pain beneath the surface. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the phone, her smile faltering. She reached for it slowly, as if she were afraid of what she might find. When she unlocked the screen and began scrolling through the messages, the color drained from her face. She looked up at Emily, wide-eyed with shock, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. "Emily, I can explain," Eleanor stammered, but the guilt was already written all over her face. "Explain it." Emily's voice rose, her composure starting to crack. "Explain to me how you could sleep with my husband, how you could betray your own daughter like this." Eleanor's hand shook as she set the phone down, her eyes filling with tears. "It wasn't supposed to happen, Emily. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I never wanted to hurt you." "A mistake?" Emily's voice was venomous. "You don't accidentally end up in bed with your daughter's husband, Mom. That's not a mistake, it's a decision. You chose to do this. You chose to destroy our family. Eleanor began to cry, her tears spilling into her wineglass. But Emily felt no sympathy. The sight of her mother's anguish did nothing to soothe the pain she carried inside. It only deepened her resentment. For years, Eleanor had been the center of attention, the one everyone adored. Emily had always lived in her mother's shadow, but she had never imagined Eleanor would cast such a dark shadow over her marriage. As the confrontation dragged on, Emily's anger transformed into something darker, more sinister. She wanted to hurt her mother, to make her feel the same pain she was feeling, and so she said the one thing she knew would cut the deepest. "You were never a good mother," Emily spat, her words sharp and deliberate. "You've always cared more about your own life, your own happiness than mine, and now you've shown that you're nothing but a selfish, heartless woman who doesn't deserve to be called a mother." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Eleanor's sobs grew louder, but Emily didn't care. She had said what she needed to say, and now all she felt was a cold emptiness. She rose from her seat, her chair scraping against the floor, and walked toward the window, staring out at the city that now felt so distant, so foreign. When she finally turned back to her mother, she saw a broken woman, a shadow of the person she had once admired. But Emily felt no satisfaction in her mother's tears, only an overwhelming sense of loss, as if the betrayal had not only destroyed her marriage, but also the last remnants of the bond she had once shared with Eleanor. Just as Emily was about to leave the room, the door opened and David walked in. He froze at the sight of them, his eyes darting from Emily's cold gaze to Eleanor's tear-streaked face. The guilt was written all over him, his shoulders tense, his face pale. "What's going on?" David asked, his voice shaky, as if he already knew the answer. Emily turned to him slowly, her eyes narrowing. "She knows," was all she said. David's face crumpled, his shoulders slumping as he realized the magnitude of the damage he had caused. He glanced at Eleanor, who could barely meet his eyes, then back to Emily, his expression one of defeat. "Emily, please," David began, but Emily cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No," she said, her voice flat. "Don't you dare try to justify what you've done. You both have ruined everything. Everything we had, everything I believed in is gone. You've destroyed it." David took a step closer, his hands reaching out as if to comfort her, but Emily recoiled, stepping back. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "Don't ever touch me again." The weight of her words hung heavily in the room, suffocating the last remnants of what had once been a happy marriage. David's hands fell to his sides, his face a mask of regret and despair, but there was nothing left to say. Nothing that could undo the damage that had been done. Emily's anger had burned itself out, leaving only a hollow emptiness in its place. The confrontation had brought no closure, no satisfaction, only a deeper sense of betrayal and loss. She had thought that exposing their affair would bring some kind of resolution, but all it had done was lay bare the raw, festering wound at the heart of their lives. Without another word, Emily walked past David and out of the room, out of the house that no longer felt like her home. The sun was setting over San Francisco, casting long shadows across the streets as she walked, her steps aimless, her mind numb. She had no destination in mind, no plan for what would come next. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that house, couldn't face the people who had torn her life apart. As she wandered the city, the reality began to sink in. There was no going back. The life she had known, the love she had once cherished, was gone, and in its place was a darkness she couldn't escape. A betrayal so deep it had shattered her very sense of self. The days after the confrontation blurred into a haze of pain, anger, and disbelief for Emily. She spent hours replaying the events in her mind, unable to comprehend how her life had taken such a twisted turn. Her once loving marriage had crumbled, reduced to a heap of lies and deceit. San Francisco, the city she had once loved for its beauty and charm, now felt like a cage trapping her in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Emily's mind was a battlefield, where every memory of her husband and her mother twisted into something darker, more perverse. The image of them together haunted her day and night, a grotesque tableau she couldn't erase from her thoughts. It consumed her, pushing her to the edge of a darkness she had never known existed within her. She became a recluse, avoiding her friends and work, shutting herself off from the outside world. The vibrant life she had once led was now a distant memory, replaced by an existence consumed by betrayal and pain. David and Eleanor's calls went unanswered, their voices pleading for forgiveness and understanding, but Emily felt nothing but cold, empty indifference. They had made their bed, and now they would have to lie in it alone. One night, unable to sleep, Emily found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, pale, gaunt, with eyes that had lost their light. She barely recognized herself. The person she had been was gone, destroyed by the people she had loved most. As she stood there, a thought took hold of her mind, an idea that had been lurking in the shadows of her thoughts, but now emerged with terrifying clarity. This pain, this torment she was enduring, couldn't go on. She couldn't live like this, but she couldn't simply leave either. She couldn't just walk away without making them feel the full weight of what they had done. They had stolen her happiness, her sense of self, and left her with nothing but bitterness and rage. It was only fair that they should pay for that. Emily's mind sank into a dark resolution, a plan forming in the corners of her shattered psyche. She knew what she had to do. The next day, Emily began putting her plan into motion. She meticulously combed through David's belongings, gathering every piece of evidence she could find, the text messages, the photos, the receipts. She documented everything, organizing it into a folder that painted a clear picture of their betrayal. It wasn't enough for them to know she had found out the truth. She wanted them to feel it, to confront the full extent of their treachery. She began drafting a letter, pouring every ounce of her pain, anger, and betrayal into the words. It wasn't just a letter. It was a manifesto of her suffering, a final message that would ensure they understood the depth of her despair. Each sentence was laced with the bitterness that had taken root in her soul, the hatred that now consumed her. But as the days passed and the plan took shape, a new emotion began to creep into Emily's heart, a twisted sense of satisfaction. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt a flicker of control over her life. She was no longer the helpless victim. She was the one holding the cards, and that power gave her the strength to continue. Emily's plan was simple but devastating. She would send the letter to both David and Eleanor along with the folder of evidence, ensuring they could never deny what they had done. But that wasn't all. Emily had decided to stage her exit from this world in a way that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. She chose a place that had meaning, a place where she and David had shared happy memories, where they had once been a family. It was a secluded spot far from the bustling streets of San Francisco, a place where she could end it all without being disturbed. The night before carrying out her plan, Emily sat in her apartment, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her. But there was no fear, no doubt. She felt only a cold, resolute calm. This was the only way to make them understand, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on her. She wrote a final note, short and direct, detailing where her body would be found. She wanted them to know, to be the ones to discover her lifeless form, to see firsthand the consequences of their betrayal. It was a final act of vengeance, one that would leave a scar on their souls that would never heal. The next morning, Emily put everything in motion. She sent the letter and the folder, ensuring they would arrive just as she was no longer there. Then she made her way to the place she had chosen, a cliff overlooking the ocean, where she and David had once watched the sunset, holding hands and dreaming of a future together. But now that future was gone, replaced by the cold, unrelenting reality of what they had done. As Emily stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping through her hair, she felt a strange sense of peace. The waves crashed against the rocks below, the sound almost comforting in her final moments. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let herself fall forward, surrendering to the abyss. The fall was brief, the impact mercifully swift, and as her broken body lay at the bottom of the cliff with the waves lapping at her lifeless form, Emily found the peace she'd been searching for. But the peace she found came at a price, one that David and Eleanor would be forced to pay for the rest of their lives. When the letter and the evidence arrived at their doorsteps, they were met with shock and horror. The realization of what they had driven Emily to do hit them like a freight train, shattering any illusions they had harbored about their actions. The guilt was overwhelming, consuming them in ways they had never imagined. David was the first to break. His mind, unable to cope with the weight of what he had done, withdrew from the world, drowning in alcohol and self-pity, unable to face the man he had become. The love he had once felt for Eleanor turned to ashes, a constant reminder of the woman who had destroyed everything he had loved. Eleanor, too, was consumed by guilt, but hers took a different form. She tried to make amends to atone for her sins, but there was no forgiveness to be found. The community that had once embraced her now turned its back, whispering behind her back, ostracizing her for the role she had played in Emily's death. In the end, their lives were destroyed, just as Emily had planned. They were left to live with the knowledge that their betrayal had driven a woman to her death, a fact that would haunt them for the rest of their days. And so, Emily's revenge was complete. Her final act of defiance left an indelible mark on the lives of those who had betrayed her, a reminder that some betrayals can never be forgiven. The city of San Francisco moved on, its people unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. But for those who knew the truth, the memory of Emily's final descent would be etched into their minds forever, a testament to the destructive power of betrayal and how far a woman would go to make those who hurt her pay.